Is this on?
Yes, my lord.
Good. Hello, this is God speaking. Can we dial that down?
Yes, my lord.
Thanks. Welcome, new arrival to the Eternity Ward. Please take a number and make your way down to the left or the right to the waiting room. All you need is the refreshments I made just for you. I would tell you to steer clear of the apples, they're forbidden, and the 2 snakes. Fools, sorry, that are chewing the fat in the corner, but you probably wouldn't listen anyway. So good luck, I bless you, and on your way.
Welcome to the Eternity World, where we flick through Reader's Digest and chat with our buddies as we wait for an appointment with God. I'm Chris Adams.
I'm Nick McKinnon.
How you going, Nick?
I'm good, Chris.
You love that question. You love that question, don't you?
I love it.
It goes deep to the heart of you.
Oh, it's such a meaningful question.
What you been up to?
Well, school's back, so I've been riding to school with my kids each day, which is loads of fun, and it's been, I don't know, strange, awesome experience that, you know, both my kids are at school now, and so I've got time to do odd jobs at home. I'm the stay-at-home mum, I tell everyone.
Yeah, so this was the new thing that you're doing this year?
Yeah.
It's going well, is it?
Yep, my wife's the breadwinner, and I sit at home in my undies and play PlayStation all day. That's what I tell her.
Yeah, right.
No, I've been painting and sanding and shopping and doing the dishes. It's really exciting. What about you, Chris? I hear it's been warm up your way.
Too warm. I'm done with this climate change business. Too hot.
It's weird in my head that it can be double the temperature where you are than where I am. So like it's 20 here and it's 40 where you are.
Maybe I should move back.
Oh, we wouldn't need the podcast then, Chris. We could shelve that.
All right. I'll stick around. So, yeah, here we are. Another podcast. Just you and I.
Yeah.
Getting back to our roots.
This is the way we like it, Chris.
Yeah.
We pretend to like the other people, but really we're just tolerating them.
What are we talking about tonight, Nick?
Black people, women. Actually, we're talking about all the things that Dave Hammond said we shouldn't talk about.
Okay. So Dave Hammond was our last guest.
He was.
And he was suggesting we shouldn't talk about some things, or we should be very careful about how we talk about some things because, what? Because we come from a place of white privilege? Generally, was that his consensus?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me like you hold the same view as him, so you'd understand it more than I. But I mean, the way I interpret it, which obviously is not going to be correct, is that we can only talk about things that we have been through ourselves. So I'm only allowed to talk about what it's like to be a white man, and anything outside of that, I'm not allowed to talk about.
Right.
Which is crazy. Dave Hammond?
I think it's more a case of that when you go into talking about things that are outside of your experience, that you need to check yourself and qualify that, yeah, that is. So you just tread carefully, but it doesn't mean you can't tread there.
Anytime I open my mouth and speak, firstly, obviously, it's only my opinion. It's not like me speaking it means that it's true.
Mm-hmm.
Me speaking it just means that that's where I'm at the moment. I don't know. I don't think I should have to qualify everything that I say by saying this is just my opinion and I could be wrong. Like, to me, it should be obvious.
I don't think the idea is that you have to always qualify it to others. I think it's more that you just need to remind yourself, especially when you may have influence over others, you know?
Yeah. That's true. But I mean, like, we'll get into this later, but I think one of the things that I like about, like, to me, we have to talk about things that we don't know everything about. Because that's the way that we learn, like, because we'll say something really stupid and make ourselves look like a dickhead, and then someone will actually come along and, like, give us the real story, and we'll go, oh, yeah, of course. But if I just remove myself from every conversation that I don't know anything about, or I'm slow to speak to in it, or anything like that, like, I don't engage in the conversations, and I think that's the opposite of helpful.
Okay.
But we'll get into that.
We will, okay.
You'll hear that rant again, listeners.
Mostly what we're meant to get into is this thing of identity politics. I wanted to talk about this because we have conversations outside of this podcast. Sorry. And you've been talking to me a bit about, you know, your frustration with what you saw as people falling into, the trap of identity politics. And I was taking a little bit of umbrage to that. Little bit, getting a bit frustrated with you Okay, so this is going back to our roots. You know, this podcast started with you going on this sort of journey of going away from certain values or opinions, perspectives, worldviews that you sort of held and challenging all of them. And so immersing yourself within things like the right sort of side of politics, the conservative type side to challenge your views. So why did you do that? Let's start with that. Why did you go and do that?
So I had this experience of growing up as a Christian and growing up in a Christian community with Christian friends and all that hullabaloo. I've always loved discussion and conversation and that sort of thing and wrestling with difficult ideas. And so I would watch these debates between atheists and theists. One of the things that I came across was a video, which I think I mentioned on the last podcast with Dave, a video, an interview of Richard Dawkins by Andrew Denton. I was watching this very much from the perspective of there is a God and this guy's crazy, but genuinely wanting to hear what his arguments were. And Andrew Denton asked him this question about, you know, what is love or something along those lines, and Richard Dawkins just was pissed. He had no idea. I don't know if he had no idea to answer it. I don't know, but he just got really angry and just like didn't answer the question, stood up, walked out of the room, and that was the end of the interview. Like, Denton's a legend. He wasn't trying to antagonize the dude. I don't know what was going on for Dawkins on that day. But I watched that and I go, like, why would anyone listen to this guy? It's a simple question. He wasn't trying to be rude, and he just got pissed off and picked up his bags and went home. You know, I thought, all right, I'm going to have to watch more of this Dawkins guy because I like this because it confirms all the things that I already believe. There's another debate between him and John Lennox, who's an Oxford mathematician, who was a really interesting dude. And again, watching this from the perspective of I'm a believer, watching it and going, you know, this mathematician, he's an intelligent dude and he had some really good points, I thought. And in that interview, the two of them were clearly, I don't know if friends is the right word, but they weren't antagonistic towards each other at all. Like there was a special features thing on the DVD where they were just sitting around having a drink or something like that afterwards, and you're just like, maybe Dawkins isn't such a dick. Maybe that was just one bad experience, that Denton interview. And so that was the first time where I went, okay, maybe I do need to look at this a little bit more objectively. And from there, you know, I found other atheists who weren't quite as brash as what Dawkins was. Like, I think Dawkins can be very arrogant and rude at times. So anyway, long story short, not that short actually, should have been a shorter story. But it's like I came to change my view on that. And once you change your view on something that you've held for a long time, you start to go, well, what else is there that I grew up with that I never really claimed as my own, that really I was just born with and socialized into believing? You know, my family's a left-wing family. You know, my dad would always watch ABC News and SBS News. I mean, we never had newspapers anyway, but if we did, we would certainly never have The Australian. So I just became really aware of this thing called confirmation bias, that I was just constantly looking for information that confirmed the things that I already believed. And so I wanted to start putting myself out there and saying, I'm not just going to consume left-wing media. I'm not just going to watch religious debates between idiot atheist and intelligent religious person. I'm going to force myself to actually look at the views of people that I disagree with, and not try and argue against them, but actually sit with their views and allow them to like wash over me or you know, marinate myself in them, all those sort of things. Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to put you on the spot here a bit. I haven't done that. You know, I'm going to sit here and claim that I'm being objective anyway. But so you grew up with all of this stuff that you hadn't really chosen for yourself. You wanted to be more objective and challenge your confirmation bias and go and choose these things for yourself. And that's what you've been doing a lot. But are you still being objective, or have you immersed yourself so much that you're now just parroting that side? Because when you start talking to me about things like identity politics, and I'm going, oh, that's what I hear from that side. You know, that's what I hear from them all the time. And I'm just like going, oh, I'm sick of hearing that, because I don't believe it's being used in a genuine manner. You know, I believe that there's this agenda behind the use of the term identity politics, and now you're using it, and I'm going, oh, please, Nick, are you still being objective? Are you? Do you need to re-immerse yourself in left-wing stuff?
So one of the first things I'd say is that I don't think any of us are objective. I don't think that's a thing. There's part of me that wishes that media companies didn't even pretend to be objective. There's part of me that wishes they just said, well, bugger trying to give equal amount of time to both sides. Let's just report what we believe to be true. Because there's no such thing as objective. Like, all of us have our views. If I joined a news organisation, I would be reporting things from my own persuasion. Like, I can try to be objective, but in a sense, it's a facade. It's not real.
But there are gradients. You know, if you're trying to be impartial, you can never be fully impartial, but you can get close or you can be far away.
Yeah. I guess striving for it's better than not striving for it, I guess. Yeah, okay. I'm still exposed to plenty of left-wing media. When I open up my Google Chrome browser, ABC is the only news website that opens. So I would still consume way more left-wing media than I do right-wing media, mostly because I haven't been able to find any decent Australian right-wing media. The Spectator's the best thing I've come across so far, and it's hit and miss. Like, some of the stuff is batshit crazy, and some of it's good. Yeah, so how the hell am I meant to answer that question? How am I meant to say, of course I'm objective?
Yeah.
Because that just shows that I'm not. I don't know. I would like to think that exposing myself to a wider range of views would force me to actually see what I believe more than reducing it to just one side. Don't think that I only consume right-wing media. That's certainly not true.
But identity politics is something that you've started talking about. Oh, well, I guess, first of all, how would you define what that is? What is identity politics?
So when I think of identity politics, I think of groups like Black Lives Matter. It's a group a political organisation that's formed based around a specific identity. So it's not broad-based. Like, it's not saying, I want education for every human being. Like, that would not be identity politics because it's not based on who you are. It's saying that I want this specific policy for everyone. So if Black Lives Matter wasn't Black Lives Matter, but was that all lives matter, then that wouldn't be identity politics. That would just be, common sense. When you shrink the area of concern to a particular group of people, a particular identity, that's where it becomes identity politics. And that's where I think it can become a bit of a pernicious thing, Kris.
Yeah.
Because, so when I say these sort of things, it can make me sound a bit like a jerk, a bit like someone who doesn't give a shit about black people or something like that. But it is obviously true that white people have more advantages. Society is easier for a white person in Australia or the US or England or, most of these Western countries than it is for a black person. There is still a hangover from the evil shit we've done in the past. So I absolutely get why people get from there and feel a sense of guilt and feel a sense of, we need to help these people out because they've been through all this shit. And there's still stuff that happens today. Like, this is probably 20 years ago now, but, Danny Glover did this thing where he just could never get a cab in New York City.
Right.
And he's, one of the most famous black people in the world. And that's obviously a pretty petty example. But it does show that there is still racism going on in our societies. And so when a white dude like me comes along and says we shouldn't have Black Lives Matter, it can come across as Nick's a racist prick. And it's uncomfortable to be saying the same sort of things as what the Ku Klux Klan would be saying.
See, that's the thing, yeah. If you align yourself over there, then I start to doubt objectivity. And I see that often people who will accuse specific social groups or minorities of identity politics can find it hard to trust them. For example, the Black Lives Matter movement, that's trying to call for all sorts of judicial and police reforms, economic reforms and educational reforms. They're actually wanting to achieve things, but then the response to that becomes what could be called identity politics in itself, because instead of listening to the movement, you end up with what is maybe racism or what is levelling accusations at the group of identity politics, and you reduce the movement to just identity alone. Not that they were necessarily doing that. And you do that because it's then easier to dismiss it. It's if you call something Black Lives Matter or feminism, that's addressing an imbalance in the society. It's not trying to create an imbalance, It's trying to work towards equality. And besides, can you ever divorce identity politics from anything? And why isn't white people saying stuff ever accused of identity politics? well, I guess, like the nationalist groups and stuff like that. But let's say a general, normal white person says something that sounds good and reasonable. Why is that never shouted down as being identity politics?
Well, that's a very general premise. But like, if a white person wanted to set up a group saying white lives matter, well, that would be identity politics, because it's a very specific group of individuals and it's exclusive of other people.
But my issue is that, white culture in our Western societies that's considered the norm. And when
What?
It's considered...
By who?
By who? By white people, and then it's like...
What?
It's considered the norm. And so because it's the norm, it doesn't get addressed as identity politics the way other stuff gets addressed.
I don't know what you mean.
All right.
Like, there's no policies that are introduced that are specific for white people.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that being white and being in that term that keeps coming up that we keep using of white privilege, in that generally in our society, most of the power in society is held by white people. It's in white hands.
Says who?
What do you mean, says who?
I mean, says who?
Look around.
I mean, to me, that's just one of those things that people say that...
If Danny Glover can't get a cab, look around. Look, I'm just saying that if white people hold the power within our institutions, within education, within media, even within religious institutions, through that, you create a culture, a predominantly white culture that sets itself up as the norm. It's what is seen as normal. And what's normal, we end up taking that for granted, and then we judge all other cultures and identities against this norm that we've created. And so we don't get called out because we can hide behind the norm, the majority, which in itself can be an identity. But we're starting to get called out for it now. And that makes some people fearful. There's a pushback. And I don't know, maybe part of that pushback is people utilising identity politics. But again, I don't know how you divorce identity from politics anyway.
So when the Black Lives Matter movement started to blow up,
yeah,
there were people that said, well, they shouldn't be saying Black Lives Matter, they should be saying All Lives Matter. And some people got pretty pissed off with that, because that minimises what they're trying to actually achieve.
Yeah.
To me, All Lives Matter makes way more sense. It's the same thing with feminism. Like, if your definition of feminism is that you want both sexes to be equal, well, that makes sense. Like, you'd have to be an imbecile not to want that. Like, you'd have to be an idiot if you want
to me, that is,
men to be above women.
That is the definition of feminism.
Yeah.
Equality of the genders.
Yeah. But the problem is it turns into women have to be better than men. Like, men aren't allowed to be feminists, as Clementine Ford says, which is just crazy. It's insane. And so when you start these groups that are exclusive, they are set around a particular identity, it ends up going off the rails. Whatever the initial motivation was, the pendulum swings too far. And so instead of doing it, instead of even setting up the pendulum, just start with a much broader goal of saying all lives matter, or we want both genders to be equal. Like, to me, that just makes way more sense.
It's just, I don't feel excluded from feminism or, Black Lives Matter. Of course, there are within any group, you're going to get someone on the far reaches of that say crazy stuff.
Yeah, except it's not just the people on the sides of it, it's the people in the middle of it that end up saying crazy stuff, because that's how you get to the middle of it. You say the craziest stuff and, everyone rallies around you. It drives people to the extremes. Whereas if instead we said we want everyone to be equal, there's no extremes there. It's just everyone loves everyone and it's kumbaya.
So, I mean, both of our goals in this is, let's get to kumbaya, right? One people, all equal. And you think identity politics gets in the way of that. I can say identity politics can get in the way of that, for the definition of what identity politics is. But I feel like the way it gets thrown around at certain groups of people, I think, is a way to try and shut the debate down, shut the conversation down. Yeah.
Like, that's the opposite of what I want.
Yeah.
Like, that's the problem I have with identity politics, is that it shuts down conversation, because I think it, like we've talked about, like, if you're not a Muslim, you're not allowed to talk about Islam. If you're not transgender, you're not allowed to talk about gender fluidity. If you're not black, you're not allowed to talk about racism. If you haven't been raped, you're not allowed to talk about Me Too. If you're a man, you're not allowed to talk about feminism. Like, I think we have to have these conversations. And, like, I think it's actually identity politics that says that, you know, Nick, you're not allowed to talk about any of these marginalised groups. I think that's awful. So it sounds like we both agree that the conversation has to go on. Mm-hmm. So you and I both agree that, like, I think black people have to be allowed to say, this is what's happening to our community. Like, I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And a woman has to be able to say, this is what happens to me. They have to be able to tell their own story. I'm not trying to shut that down at all.
Right.
What I'm trying to say is I think it needs to be broadened. Instead of saying, you know, I'm a black person, this is what's happening to me, throw out the black person thing. Who cares about that? Instead of just say, this is what's happening to me.
Yeah, I'm just like, but it's happening to them because they're a black person. And so that's part of the story.
Yeah, I think that's one of the problems I have. So with Black Lives Matter, do you know what started that? Like, have you looked into it?
Yeah, it was...
So Trayvon Martin was killed by George Zimmerman. He was the local neighbourhood watch dude in his little gated community. And he was going down to Target to get his groceries. There'd been a whole bunch of break-ins in his community. And he saw this dude in a hoodie. It was raining, and he thought it was just weird that there was someone out. And he'd had people run through his yard before, after breaking into the house next door or down the road. He's got a wife and kids, and he was worried that that sort of thing could be going on again. He called the police, went out, and depends who you listen to, but there was a scuffle. He had his nose broken and his head slammed into concrete, and he ended up shooting the guy, and he died. And it shouldn't matter whether one of them was black and one was white. You should just hear that story and go, if that's the truth of what happened, I can understand that. Like, if I was carrying a gun around and someone was slamming my head into concrete, yep, I could easily do that.
Wasn't, you know, I'm going to have to check this afterwards, but wasn't he shot in the back running away from the situation?
Yeah, good question. I don't know.
Fact check time. Martin was not shot in the back running away. The running away had happened prior, but Zimmerman had followed him despite police advising him not to. There was then a physical struggle. Zimmerman was beaten to the ground and shot Martin in the chest at close range in self-defense. There was also no evidence that Martin was doing anything other than returning to his house from the 7-Eleven.
I don't know this. I don't necessarily believe this, but let's assume that George Zimmerman was a racist bastard who shot him because he was black.
Right.
And then this movement starts. The problem is then the next time there's a black person shot by a white police officer, no one cares what the circumstance is. They just hear, white police officer, black kid shot, racism, Black Lives Matter. And this happened with the Michael Brown thing where he robbed a convenience store. He tried to steal the gun off the police officer. The police officer shot him, and the police officer gets in trouble for it. And there's riots in Ferguson, Missouri for, you know, days and weeks afterwards. It's ludicrous. Like, if you try and grab a police officer's gun, you should expect to get shot. I don't care what colour your skin is. If you try and grab a police officer's gun, you're an idiot and you are very likely to get shot.
But you're picking two stories that they can be seen from different sides. There are stories which are just ridiculous, as in they're just so clear that it's, you know, black people not being treated as if their lives do matter.
Yeah, I'm not trying to tell you there aren't arsehole white policemen out there. I'm sure there are. But what I'm saying to you is not every white police officer that shoots a black person is a bad person. But that's what happens in these movements. Like, Black Lives Matter was huge in Ferguson, Missouri, and it's insane.
I feel like I'd have to go and look at all the details of the story.
Because the more you look into it, the more you just go, put yourself in that police officer's shoes. Like, what do you want to do if someone's reaching for your gun? If they get your gun, what do you think they're going to do with it?
That's fine. I'm not going to argue with you on that. But part of the argument is that, you know, can they trust that the white policemen are being honest? You know, there's this whole atmosphere that white police get away with it all the time, and that's what's happening over there. I'm not that up with it. I can't.
Do you think that Black Lives Matters increases the level of trust between black people and white police officers? Because I think it does the opposite. I think it massively creates a divide. And if I'm a white police officer in the United States, I would be freaked out, because to pull a gun on a black person, even if they've done something wrong, you are going to get slammed. And it's wrong.
Well,
being a police officer is hard work.
Yeah, and part of any social protest type group is that they're going to be putting pressure on what is considered the norm and the status quo. They're going to put pressure on that, because if they don't do that, then nothing, they might be of the opinion that nothing's going to change. So it doesn't mean that we're in an ideal situation, but there's a pushback. We're not going to take this line down anymore. So obviously it creates ripples out from, the center, which are going to have some negative consequences. But just because it's going to have negative consequences doesn't mean that the movement itself is not a worthy movement to try and address the imbalance and get towards equality.
Yeah, but those are two of the foundational moments in Black Lives Matter. They're not just superfluous incidents that occurred on the boundaries of it. They are two of the main things that happened that spurned the movement. When I looked into them in detail, both of them left big doubts in my head as to whether the black person truly was the victim.
Yeah, you call them the foundational moments of the movement, and yes, that would be accurate, but the whole atmosphere would have been leading up to that, in the first place. It's again, so it's not necessarily that that's the start of someone feeling oppressed and feeling like they're looked down upon and feeling like their lives don't matter. It's just that was the trigger point, I guess.
Yeah, and that's the corrosive thing about identity politics, because you see yourself as part of a group. And so anytime one of these situations comes up, you already have your views about who is right and who is wrong.
Mm. Okay.
And so if you're a black person and you are in this Black Lives Matter movement, or even if you're not black, if you're a left-wing person, I remember when Michael Brown was shot. I was a left-wing person at that point in time, and when it happened, I went, oh, those fucking bastard police officers, they're racist pigs in the deep south of the US. They just, they don't care about black people. They just shoot them and whatever, and they know they'll get away with it. And they do get away with it most of the time. And that was my response, because I was a left-wing person and I... that idea of white guilt, that us white people have, been the perpetrators of so much evil towards black people. That's definitely true. I'm not being cynical there. We absolutely have been. But when you see yourself as part of a tribe, it just ends up that when the next situation comes up, you just reactively side with one side or the other without looking at the facts of the case. And that's why groups like Black Lives Matters are corrosive. We should be saying all lives matter, and whenever the next black person gets shot, we shouldn't care about the colour of their skin. We should look at the facts of the case and go, let's work out what happened.
I can see the corrosiveness if it doesn't achieve anything and it just stays in one spot. But that's down to everyone. Because as I said earlier, they're trying to get reform. They're trying to change structures within society to where they feel they're treated as equally as if they matter. And then, well, no need for the movement after that. But yeah, sure. So ripples, as I said, they're going out, they'll carry some negative consequences. But look, there needs to be a response to an attitude that, as you said, it comes from, a deep, dark past of shit that white people have done. Well, some of those attitudes, they're still held. And when those attitudes are in power, you push back. The civil rights movement, they made incredible ground. And here's another step, some more ground to make. But yeah, if it just stays just a protest group, doesn't go anywhere, then yeah, I reckon we can end up with what you're saying.
So you don't think that's happening now?
Oh, well, of course it's happening. But part of the reason for me why I think it's happening is because the people who don't like the Black Lives Matter movement and respond to it in such a way by just accusing them of identity politics, Nick, is reducing their movement to identity. That's unhelpful.
But it is.
But you're reducing.
It is reducing it to identity.
You're reducing it to identity. They're not necessarily saying it's just all about identity. You're the one.
What? So when they say Black Lives Matter, you don't think they're just referring to black people?
See, I disagree with you that they're not saying that all lives don't matter. They're not saying all lives don't matter. They're just saying Black Lives Matter too.
Yeah,
maybe a different.
They're being exclusive.
I just feel like if you call it All Lives Matter, then you don't necessarily. I mean, it could be a better name. It could be. But I feel like if you had a name like that, then you may not be able to put as much pressure on achieving what it is that you want to achieve. You may not be able to get the focus on what you want focused on. It's more kumbaya, but it's not necessarily as powerful. I think your argument has some validity, but I think their argument of calling it Black Lives Matter has as much validity, if not more, because that's the thing that needs fixing now.
I guess I see tribalism as being a bigger issue.
Yeah.
And so
you do talk about...
So I want to avoid tribalism almost at any cost. Like, I think we are already moving towards a less racist society.
Yeah.
Even without groups like Black Lives Matter.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we're already headed in the right direction. I think groups like Black Lives Matter actually push us in the wrong direction. I think it segregates people even more. Those right-wing racist people, it just fortifies their encampment. And instead of bringing everyone together,
they've always been there. They've always been there. There's a really, I mean, okay,
but they've been getting smaller.
Well,
like in the last 10 years, do you think that section of our population has been reducing or increasing? I think it's been increasing.
Yeah, I think you're right. But you're saying it's been increasing as a response.
Possibly. I don't know. But to me, that would be a very natural...
Okay, but is it a response to groups like Black Lives Matter, or is it a response to us getting closer and closer to equality? So which one is more responsible for the increasing? Because I just remember reading...
That doesn't make sense to me.
No, well, I remember reading a study, right, about there was this thing done during the election in America where all these white people were told that they were actually outnumbered by people of colour within their state or their whatever little territory, whatever. They were outnumbered, and it was shown that when they were aware they were outnumbered, they were... I don't know how many times, I can't remember what it said, but they were just so much more likely to go and vote with Trump. It's just this fear of the other, and fear that they were going to lose power, fear that they're going to get left behind. I don't know.
But you got to think, like, what causes that?
Yeah.
And, like, I don't think it's, you see an Asian person walking down the street. I don't think that causes that. I think, like, there was this school shooting in somewhere in the US.
In Florida, yeah.
Florida.
Yeah.
So, a bunch of people got killed. And on my Facebook feed, what comes up all the time? All these left-wing people putting up statuses about saying, see, he wasn't a Muslim. It's not just Muslims that kill people. And it's just like, well, of course it's not just Muslims that kill people. No one's saying it is. And so these right-wing people, like, see this and they just go, you guys are insane. Like, as soon as there's a mass shooting that isn't committed by Muslims, that's your evidence that there's nothing wrong with Islam. It's just crazy. Whereas next time when it is a Muslim, all the left-wing people will be going, well, he didn't do it because of Islam. Of course he did it because of Islam. They said it. They said, Allah Akbar. No, I don't even know how to say it. Glory to God, whatever. Every time a terrorist incident happens and a Muslim person does the attack, all the left-wing people run around saying, well, it's not because of Islam, because I know an Islamic person and they're quite friendly to me. Like, that is what causes right-wing people to go, the left have lost its mind. They just refuse to look at the reality of the situation.
Well, one of the realities of the situation is the right aren't going to go anywhere near gun control. That's insane.
Yeah.
That is insane.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
That's nuts.
What the hell is any human being walking around a school with an assault rifle? It boggles the mind. I don't know how any human being can think my right to bear arms means that I can have an assault rifle. It's crazy.
And so who supports that?
Yeah. Idiots on the right wing.
Right, yeah.
I do not see myself as right wing.
Yeah.
At all. Like, there are some views that I like, my disdain for identity politics seems to be something that right wing people have, and left-wing people go crazy with their I love black people and I love transgender people and I love whatever.
Well, this gets to the question of, right, I do identify as left-wing. So this is an identity. This is sort of what identity politics is partly about. We create identities for ourselves and we assign ourselves to groups and to this shared understanding and shared experience.
And we have to have identities. It's really important that we have them.
Well, this is the thing. So this, when you talk about, like, often you talk about tribalism, you want to get rid of tribes. Because that's what would get me frustrated is I don't mind the idea of getting rid of tribalism, but we've had discussions about, for me, you still need to be able to maintain cultural difference within all of us being one people. And we've had these arguments where you're like, well, isn't culture just tied to tribe and you can't separate the two? Is that right?
I have no fondness for different cultures. I mean, if you like spicy food and I don't like spicy food, cool. I've got no problem with that.
But this is... okay. I was just going to say, this is where our conversation on identity politics actually began, where you said... hang on. Where was that? Hang on.
while you're looking for that, can I say something in response to what you just said?
Yeah, sure. Go.
So I may have spoke confusingly in the past, perhaps, or misleadingly. I don't want to get rid of tribes. Like as I say, I think identity is really important. We have to feel like we're part of a group. What I want to do is I want to blow it up. Instead of seeing ourselves as left-wing or right-wing or Republican or Democrat or Liberal or Labor or feminist and whatever the hell the opposite of feminist is, I want to see...
Misogynist.
I want to... Yeah, sure. I don't think anyone sees themselves as misogynist, though.
Yeah.
It's sort of like racist. No one calls themselves a racist.
Yeah.
I want all of us to expand our tribes. Like I've talked about before, I want it to be all sentient beings. But I think probably a good stepping stone before that is human beings. I want us to just see ourselves as part of the human race, and there is nothing standing between myself and all of the human race. There is no line anywhere where there's left-wing person, right-wing person. It's just all of us here together, and I'm not part of any tribe any smaller than that. That's our tribe.
Yeah.
That's the tribe I want us to all see ourselves part of.
Yeah, and when you were arguing that with me, you decided to throw a little Bible stuff at me. This is how our conversation got started. I don't know if you remember.
Oh, yeah, the Paul thing.
Where you said, how about we tear down these fictional divisions and say we're all the same? The Paul thing is what? We're neither Jew nor Gentile, neither male nor female.
Circumcised nor whatever the opposite of that is.
Neither slave nor free. We are one. And I was like going, oh, heck, okay. Now he's throwing the Bible at me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And... so I went and walked my dog and wrestled with that for like an hour going, oh, heck, because that's what it says. So I had to go and do a whole bunch of research on that. And what I found was, saying that because Christianity is meant to be, we're all one under Christ sort of thing. So it's sort of picturing your idea of a one tribe. And it has been a lot about, leaving somewhere to become this new thing. That's part of the whole history of Christianity. But so I was like going, well, how do we still maintain our culture within that, and found that there was some other Paul verses not far beyond that, some instructive verses a little bit further on saying, give no offense to Jew or Gentile. And then you got really annoyed. And so that was like, yeah, okay, they still retain identities and cultures. But you have to be able to give offense, you were saying. But as
of course you do.
Yes, yeah. But the more I was looking at that, it was actually saying, well, what people were saying it was saying was that it recognized identities, but mostly don't offend someone in such a way as to tempt them into sinning against you, which I was like going, okay, so, you throw a Bible verse at me and then I send one back to you and you say, that's ridiculous. I'm going, okay, but you just threw one at me. Either it all counts or it doesn't count. But no.
Not from my perspective.
No, and not from mine either.
I mean, yeah, you're happy to pick and choose as much as I am, but...
Yeah. But I was just like, but no, so I did some more research into that.
That is a good point, though.
It means provide no obstacle that pushes the other into sin. So it's not about you can't offend someone, but it's like don't respond to them in such a way that you're going to encourage them to, be corrosive, like the words you're using, essentially. You were also asking me if I thought that people in the current debates we've been having have been holding oneness over separateness. And I was going, well, some try, but I thought that was a fair question. And we've got to get better at that. We've got to get better at holding our oneness over the things that separate us. But I have to hold that our differences and our diversity and our cultural differences can be maintained within a oneness. Difficultly, but it can be maintained. I don't know. You don't agree, maybe?
I just don't really care about culture stuff. Like, maybe that's just because I don't feel like I have a culture.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it.
I don't know.
But it's also partly, for me, I think it's because you and I, as much as we sort of feel like we don't have a culture or whatever, we sort of share in the cultural norm. We're part of that majority again. We're part of that privilege. I don't know, for you to say that someone else should leave their stuff behind, it doesn't cost you anything. Okay, here's a question to you. So what's the default position of your one tribe?
My tribe, Kris. Obviously. Obviously. What sort of a question is that?
The height of arrogance.
Okay, so, yeah, and look, this might be a cultural thing, but if it is, I think my culture is better than everyone else's.
I can understand anyone thinking that.
Yeah, well, yeah, but they're all wrong and I'm right.
Sure.
So whatever culture I have is very stripped down.
Yeah.
Like in the same way that Descartes just said, well, what do I know is true? Well, I'm throwing everything out and I think, therefore I am. That's the only thing I've got. I know that I'm conscious. In the same way, for me, the only thing that I care about in terms of culture, the only thing that I would say that, if you picked me up and threw me in Iran, there's not much that I would actually be that upset that I'd lost. I mean, obviously there's, I wouldn't want my wife to have to live in a cloth bag for the rest of her life. That'd be not so fun. Yeah, okay, maybe there is a lot. Maybe Iran's not the best place to choose.
Well, okay, let me give you an example then.
Go.
Let's say that the default oneness that we're all going to share carries with it an expectation that because, how many percentage of the world believe in God? I mean, it's falling all the time, but it used to be 90-something%, so that's pretty...
A fairly large
percentage.
percentage.
So it's pretty much a default. So what if you were expected to leave behind your doubt?
Yeah, that'd be awful.
Right.
So that's what I'm talking about Descartes. Like, I want the default society to just be as bare minimum as possible and that everyone is free to have whatever they want.
Yep.
So long as, you're not harming another human being.
That's...
And, that's why I think our culture is better than, say, Iran's culture.
Yeah, fair enough.
Like, I don't think it's, just a postmodernist, everyone can do whatever they want and it's all okay. I think there are absolute rights and absolute wrongs in terms of, putting a woman in a cloth bag for their entire life for some weird reason that, men can't control themselves and they'll just go crazy and rape every woman that they see. That's horrendous.
So for me, the line is when the separateness, the identity, the cultural identity, is harmful towards what's considered our oneness. That's a tricky thing. Where do you draw that line in some instances? Because you can tolerate some cultural aspects, even though they don't necessarily agree with whatever this default society is that you're setting up. But so people should be free, right, to have their cultural identities. Do we agree in that, as long as it doesn't cause harm?
Yeah, but that's part of our culture. Like, part of our culture is individualism and that all of us have the right to go about life however we choose. And I think that's the best way. Whereas, there are other cultures that say, no, you have to do things the exact way that I think you should do them. Whereas our culture doesn't do that. Well, I guess they do in saying that everyone's free to choose.
I'm an individual and I wish I could do whatever I want. But it still gets back to identity. Individualism is personal identities. And then we have this multifaceted identity where in groups or things, ideas, we share stuff where we overlap with others here and there, but not in everything. And that sharing, I think, is what forms culture and cultural understandings. And, we're complex. But I mean, okay, I just thought you were more, well, I guess one of the things that concerned me, going back to where this all started, was that when I hear you using terms like identity politics, which I hear from certain people, like on the far right, the alt-right, I get to wondering if you just want to ask people to come over to your tribe, your default society, where you don't have to give away much, but you're expecting everyone else to give away everything. And even if you're not asking that, I think some people are asking that, and they get away with asking that because they're asking it from a position of power and influence and privilege. And
you think people use identity politics as a way to get more, I don't know, Muslims to come sit in their Bible study groups? Is that what you're saying? The people who I've heard talk about identity politics are Jordan Peterson, who I don't think would come at it from that perspective. Sam Harris, who definitely wouldn't because he's an atheist. And Jordan Peterson is a Christian. Well, kind of. Who's the other one? Ben Shapiro, who's a Jew, and Milo Yiannopoulos, who is, I don't know what the hell Milo is. They're all different religions for starters. You could say, I don't know, I guess most of them are right-wing. Sam Harris isn't right-wing. I don't even know if Jordan Peterson is right-wing. Like, to me, the critique of identity politics is about broadening who you see yourself as part of instead of limiting yourself to a particular tribe. As I say, I'm sure there are scary right-wing people out there who do use it in a quasi-racist way, but I don't know.
I don't
that
know.
hasn't been my experience.
Yeah,
Of
I
listening
mean,
to
I'm
people
still
talk
trying to
about it.
understand it because it's a pretty vague term at times.
Yeah, agreed.
It's just for me, the people it gets used against are minority groups.
Yeah, because it's minority groups that start identity groups. And that's understandable. Like, I
So
get that.
is the majority not an identity in itself?
So if you say white people are the dominant culture in Western civilization or something like that, people who are against identity politics don't want white whatever to be the dominant whatever. They want it to be all of us inclusive, and that we need to get rid of the idea of white and the idea of black, the idea of different religions. We need to get rid of all of that. And instead of focusing on your particular group, focus on everyone. Because once you start up a group that focuses on a specific group of people, you are starting a tribe for yourself.
You might want to discard all that, but I'm not sold that the majority in their hearts do. Because I just can't see how we can divorce identity from politics. The same as I don't really see how I sort of ascribe to everything is political, everything is spiritual, everything is identity. It's also deeply intertwined. Everything is cultural. It's also deeply intertwined. That to get to a place of oneness, we start forming an identity from as soon as we go, oh, I'm not part of my mother. There's the first form of separateness, So identity is not a wrong thing.
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, and I agree with you that there are things that we should leave behind. We need to rub off some of the edges on the things that we identify ourselves as, so that our separateness doesn't get in the way of our oneness.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think the thing we disagree on is that I think those specific groups create divisiveness instead of pushing us towards that oneness. Like, I agree with you, identity is really important. I think we need to see our identity as part of the human race. And anything else, anything smaller than that, I think needs to be thrown out.
Yeah, and you're right.
Race needs to be thrown out. Gender needs to be thrown out. Any of that.
Well,
get rid of it all. Religion thrown out.
How do you throw it out? How do you throw out race and gender, for starters?
I mean, to the individual. I mean, so I don't want to see myself as white.
Yeah.
I don't want to see, I don't want my identity tied up in being white. I don't want my identity being tied up in being male. I don't want my identity being tied up to whatever job I do. None of that is my identity. Being a human is my identity.
Yep.
That's it.
But you're allowed to maintain identities outside of that human one, as long as that human one is the one that's at the forefront.
Yeah, except holding other identities will pull you into confirmation bias, into, I see myself as being a person that sticks up for black people, and then when the next black person gets shot, I just reactively just go, well, he was the victim.
Yeah, and where I guess so the difference is that I see those movements as potentially moving us towards equality, because there's something that needs to be addressed to get towards equality.
Even if from time to time that means you will be supporting the person who was actually the arsehole in the situation, and you'll be harming the very decent police officer who was just responding to a violent situation, and you're okay with that as being collateral damage on the way to the pendulum swinging back.
I'm not okay with collateral damage, but within any situation, I don't know how you avoid collateral damage in a complex world, but it doesn't mean that I'm okay with it. Okay, so it's this case of, am I okay with the officer that didn't actually do anything wrong being part of the collateral damage? No, I'm not okay with that. But what I'm more not okay with is a whole race of people being treated as less than and being treated as if their lives don't matter. So it becomes a weight issue.
But what evidence do you have for that statement?
What evidence do I have for that statement? I listen to the experience of the people.
And because they say it, it makes it true.
If there's enough weight of it and there's enough feeling of truth within that, well, what do you expect me to do?
I would want some evidence, like a specific case. And then you look at that and you go, yep, you're right. That black dude was treated horrendously.
Well, of course you want the details of a case and you want justice every time, but we're flawed. But if you want a specific case, how about the black mental health worker? He was attempting to retrieve I think it was white autistic patient who got out, was on the road playing with his toy truck, ignoring the officers who came along. And the mental health worker, he laid down as was ordered. He put his hands in the air as ordered. He kept trying to explain the situation, who he was, who his patient was, and they shot him. And there's just so many stories, too many stories like that.
Yeah, so if what you just described then is the full story, that's encapsulating everything, there's nothing else to be heard about that story, then obviously that's horrific. And I don't care what the race of either of those people were, that's horrific.
Yeah.
If it's a white police officer, he should be in a whole world of trouble. Of course he should be.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter what the
point.
race...
That's the point. The point is that there are these people that should be in a whole world of trouble are getting into a whole world of trouble because of the system, because of, there's not that reform. And so that's why there's a response.
You don't know that.
Well, that's the feeling of the people.
Yes, that's the feeling of the people. I agree with that.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that feeling is very likely wrong.
So how do you...
So you're... Yeah. How do I know that?
Yeah, how do you know?
How the hell would I know that?
How would you know that? And how would I know that? We're going by stories and the explanations of people's experiences, and we read about it, and sure, I'm going to read more left-wing media than right because I have a confirmation bias, but I don't know what you want me to do apart from hear these stories and try and objectively as I can judge whether or not these people are lying or telling the truth and form an opinion.
Yeah.
So maybe we should shut up about this because I wasn't there.
We should shut up about things that we have no idea about.
Well, I don't want to claim that I know, but also not that I know nothing because I read, and despite bias, I can attempt objectivity.
Good.
All right.
Here's where my problem comes in. That I was one of those people. For years, I went around going, this is just more evidence that black people are being screwed over by the system and that these police officers are getting off, and, there's obviously some corruption going on within the judicial system to allow these people getting off. And then years later, I would actually look at the facts of the situation of what actually happened, and I'd go, oh, God, I was wrong. And I was just being dragged along by my identity of I care for black people because I'm not a racist pig, and I'm just dragged along. And so I've seen it in myself that I've been dragged along by this identity politics thing of, I want to see myself as a not racist, whatever that is. And so you just end up supporting situations where you should not be supporting them because I don't have a clue. And whoever it is that got Sergeant or Detective or Police Officer Wilson off for, not murder of Michael Brown, they would have a hell of a lot more information than I would. And for me just to reflexively say they're racist, they're corrupt, is just ridiculous. It's insane that I did that.
Do you really believe that black people in America are treated equally as if their lives matter equally as a generalization?
No.
Right.
Not as a generalization.
Yeah, so for me, that's what it's in response to.
But
You're picking out specific, incidents, but I'm like going, there's a lot of stories.
Yeah, but the reason I pick out those specific incidences is because they were central to Black Lives Matter. They weren't just superfluous. And because they're examples of how when we tie our identity to a specific group or a specific idea, that we end up going along with things that just aren't right. Like, that's my point. Like, yes, there are only two circumstances, and I agree with you 100%. There would definitely be other circumstances where there is a racist police officer who takes advantage of a situation and shoots a black person. I've got no doubt that happens. So we both agree that conversation shouldn't be shut down ever. People on the right should not try and shut down conversation by saying... I don't know how saying identity politics shuts down conversation, but you obviously think it does. I guess.
Well, it's the same it's the same way that the left can shut down conversation on the right by saying you're a bigot or you're a homophobe. For me, it's the same sort of thing in that it's unhelpful and it reduces someone to something and it just shuts conversation down, I guess.
And that definitely shouldn't shut someone down. Like whenever I would say my problems with identity politics is that you should be articulating whatever your position is rather than tying it to an identity. So, police officers shouldn't be allowed to just shoot civilians with no reason.
I just don't know how you can in some instances how you can articulate something without tying it to identity. That's all. Like you need to be able to tie it to identity at times, but that doesn't mean that you're falling into identity politics all the time. If it's part of the experience, if it's part of the story, if it's part of the conversation, it's part of the conversation.
Yeah, except you end up including cases that really shouldn't be part of the conversation.
Yeah, fair enough. That can happen, sure.
Yeah. We should end by singing Kumbaya.
I can't sing. No, it's just, because, if you're a minority, then how do you have a conversation without talking about your identity as a minority? We want to have conversations that are going to take us towards inclusiveness of all, as you always say, as of sentient beings. But for me, we have to maintain, the differences within that. Otherwise, having that lack of diversity can be just, I think Sky mentioned it, that can be a further destruction of someone's identity and culture.
I think diversity is really important.
Yeah, cool.
In no way against diversity. Yeah.
How do we wrap it up?
Come on, let's sing.
We're not singing Kumbaya. It ain't happening. You can sing.
Kumbaya, my lord, Kumbaya. Is that all it is?
Yeah, I'm glad to see you getting spiritual again, Nick. That's good.
Oh, what does Kumbaya mean? I don't even know.
Doesn't it mean come together sort of thing? Isn't it?
Oh, we could just sing the Beatles then. Come together.
I'm going to look it up. What does Kumbaya
right now? My band used to play that song. I loved it. It's like the only Beatles song I like.
The word kumbaya is believed by many to be Pidgin English and a transliteration for the prayerful plea to God of come by here. So it's come here, God.
Yeah, well, all right. Well, that's what I've been calling since the start of the very first episode, Kris.
Yeah. All right.
Where are you, God? Kumbaya, get here.
You should work it into our theme music. There you go. In wrapping it up.
Kris, you are in my tribe.
Nick, you're allowed to not be in mine. As long as you're in mine as well.
Come on, let this alt-right man into your tribe.
You are in my tribe of sentient beings, Nick.
Sick. What about Milo? Is he in yours?
Well, yeah, he's a sentient being. That's the tricky thing, isn't it?
What is?
Well, that if we're going to come together under some sort of banner or something, that it's going to include all of those people that really piss us off.
Yeah. Whoever the heck the leader of the Black Lives Matter group is, they're part of my tribe. They're my homies.
Cultural appropriation, Nick.
Everyone is part of my tribe. Hitler, you're part of my tribe. You are built of the same atoms as I was. Martin Luther King, you're built of the same atoms I am. The only difference is the choices we make. Let's make some good choices.
Yeah, let's keep moving towards inclusivity, equality. Yeah.
One of the images that I've been finding really helpful over the last week is seeing myself as a puzzle piece. And whenever I have a disagreement with another human being, I just go, okay, well, we just don't fit together perfectly. And that doesn't mean that, there's something wrong with any of us. It just means we fit in a different part of the puzzle. And I really like that. I don't know. I've found that really helpful to go, okay, this conflict that we're having doesn't mean that there's anything wrong going on. We just don't fit together, and there's other places where they do fit. There's other places that I fit. We're all still part of the same puzzle, people.
Hopefully someone's going to put it all together one day and put it on a wall.
Do people put puzzles on the wall?
Yeah, you finish the puzzle, you put it in a frame.
Really?
Yeah, put it on the wall.
I just thought you put it back in the box and then do it 3 years later.
Hang it up there high so that we can all see it and marvel at this puzzle that we've put together. I like that image.
Hang your picture high.
That's right. That's exactly what I was thinking. Thanks for listening to the Eternity Ward, and thanks for being made out of the same pieces of matter that we're made out of. You're part of our tribe too.
Come be part of our tribe. Comment, like, share.
Yeah.
I don't know if I care about share, but comment, like. Don't like. I don't care about like. Just comment.
Criticize.
Give us your yes. Argue with us. Give us your thoughts.
Yeah. We look forward to hearing from you. Goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
Scott here again. If at any point in this podcast you found yourself yelling vainly into the void at two idiots who can't even hear you and refuse to listen to you, then congratulations, you know exactly how I feel. Luckily for you, there are other ways to contribute. You can leave reviews on iTunes or wherever you listen to it, share it on social media, or discuss it in your blog, podcast, or fellowship group. Subscribe, like, nod your head, raise your fist, shout amen, but probably don't send a prayer because I'm kind of busy right now. Join the discussion in the comment sections, ask questions, and do come back and join us again here on the Eternity Ward.